Since he first appeared on the big screen in Empire Strikes Back, to his fall into the Sarlacc on Tatooine in Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett has always been my favorite character in the Star Wars universe, and he's my inspiration for my Mandalorian Mercs costume. So in this video, we're going to be showing you how I sewed and put together a flak vest, which eventually will hold my armor, torso, and shoulder armor. So we start out with patterns. I went ahead and took my measurements. Instructions are on the Mandalorian Mercs website. I also used graph paper because the 1-inch squares transition very well to wrapping paper, which is easily available, and I use that to draw my patterns out. I would recommend that you make a test run, so I used some denim fabric to make a shell, and then once I got those sizes corrected, I went ahead and used some duck cloth. Again, that's a very thick canvas for my outer shell, and I also transferred that same pattern over to some interfacing, which will give it a little bit of bulk. Also, when I add my stitching for quilting, it'll wind up just look a little thicker, like a little more padding, as close to the original flak vest that Boba Fett used. So I'm lining up my interfacing and duck cloth here. I have it pinned together. I went ahead and got over to the sewing machine. I'm just going to do a straight stitch here. Use about a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I use the pencil to draw a straight line, so you can see my stitching just going straight down that seam allowance. Again, you're going to want to put your interfacing on the outside. You want to sandwich that around your two pieces of your outer shell, and using back stitching because you want to make sure that these stay together. Once that is sewn, you want to go ahead and head over to the ironing board. You want to flatten this out. You want to make sure you take all wrinkles out, and you want to make sure you have a really straight and clean stitch line. So I'm going to sew the interfacing first, and I'm also going to go back and remove a little bit of the interfacing so that I can sew the seam flat, iron the seam flat. So you can see how I have the interfacing here. I fold that back, and then you can see the duck cloth, 2 layers, as well as the interfacing on the other side. Now this is a technique that I use just because I don't like having a lot of bulk around the seams. So I like to trim off the seam allowance of the interfacing so that when I iron the seam allowance flat, again, it just doesn't create a lot of bulk. Not necessary, but again, just one of those details. I like to do things the hard way, so might as well do them the first time through. So you can see I have a straight line there. I also realized at this point that my camera was just a little bit out of focus. So once I remove the interfacing on one side, I go ahead, fold the other side back, iron it flat, and I'll trim that. Again, you don't have to do this, but it's just a step that I like to take to remove some of that bulk. So now I'm just left with the 2 flaps there for the seam allowance. You're going to want to do this on all of your panels when you're sewing them together. Again, your pattern is set up for just a right side or a left side of the front and the back, so you'll have to turn that over, make another panel, and then you'll sew the 2 pieces together. I made some slight changes to this pattern because I wanted my vest to to open on the sides, to have side flaps instead of a Velcro strap down the back and a zipper. So again, I went ahead and made some modifications. But here you go. This is your final, what your panels will look like once they are ironed flat. And you want to do this for both sides, front and back. Once those panels are sewn together on the front, you'll see we still have our seam allowances for our sleeves as well as our neck hole. I'll flip that over and you can see the interfacing sewn to the inside. Also, the vest that we use for the test, we're going to go ahead and pop the seams, use some fabric adhesive to go ahead and tape that to the interfacing so that we can make a thick vest so that we can add some of our quilting stitches to. Again, this will add it some bulk, and again, just some decorative stitches. I also chalked those lines out. I used a very slow speed on the sewing machine to get those sewn together. I left the shoulders open so that we could attach those front and back panels together at the shoulders. Remember, I said I wanted to have my vest with the side panels that could open to put it on, so I could just drop it over my head and then attach the side panels together, make it for quick assembly, or make it for a quick way to put it on. You'll see I did the front and the back. Also, I used the same pattern that I used for the outer shell to make an inner liner. Once that was sewn, I made a very thick vest. I went back and added a zigzag stitch there to take care of any of the frayed edges, and then I covered that unsightly seam with some bias tape. You'll see here I hand stitched it all the way around, and then you'll see some of you might recognize these straps from the vest when I made that video a couple of weeks ago, actually about 2 months ago. I also hand sewed some snaps on there as well as some Velcro. It's actually the Velcro that's holding this vest together. These straps are just decorative, and you can see the yellow stitching that I used there for the lines that I sewed on the front and back panels. The sleeves were not on my original design, but I decided I wanted to add those afterwards, so I went ahead and included a segment of the video here showing you how I attach the sleeves. I'm also going to run this in real time, at least for the front half of the sleeve, just to show you how fast I'm sewing. You don't want to go too quickly, but I put a temporary stitch down so that the sleeve would stay in place. And now what I'm doing is I'm trying to get my needle as close to that bias tape as possible, that bias binding there. I'm not trying to hide the stitching, but I am trying to make it as hard to see as possible. Again, just trying to get really, really close. I had mentioned when I was sewing my flight suit that I changed the speed of my sewing machine. I actually inside the pedal you can actually change. There's a little dial that you can speed it up or slow it down. So I have it to its slowest setting possible. And that's how I like to sew, very, very, very slow. And again, you can take your time on this, just trying to get as close to that seam as possible. And don't worry, once I get to the halfway point, I go ahead and speed it up. I apologize for not having a video showing how I put the sleeves together, but it's kind of self-explanatory once you see the pattern. I think a lot of folks sew them on backwards as well, but again, I was going for that as close as I could to get that Boba Fett look. Like I said, I'll speed this up here. Using the same color thread as that chocolate brown that I used for the duck cloth. You'll see once I remove that, you can see the old temporary stitch line to the left, but then the stitch line that I just put down close to the bias tape, you can barely see that. So I'll go ahead and do the other side. And if you don't want to use the sleeves, you don't have to. I know that's a popular method now, and especially with the Book of Boba Fett, his shoulder armor isn't attached to the outer flak vest the way it was in the original. There are also lots of Mandalorian Mercs that use different methods to attach their shoulder armor, their pauldron, so I just wanted to attach it to the sleeves. You can see my finished product here. I have my flight suit that I showed you guys last week. You can see how my vest attaches on the sides. Gives me plenty of room to move my arms forward, backward, all around. You can see how the straps are there. Again, just decorative. This will eventually hold my chest armor and shoulder armor. snap those on and off. So again, hopefully you've enjoyed this video, watching me put this flak vest together. I appreciate you guys watching, and please hit that like,